We begin tonight with an update to a story we brought you last December. At the time, Boston's historic Old South Church decided to sell some precious artifacts, including a copy of the Bay Psalm book. The idea upset some congregants, including the church historian, who has since resigned in protest. But flash forward to last night, the book reached the auction block, marking the end of a years-long discussion on how to value the past against the present. Old South Church has a history as rich as its landmark home in Copley Square. But maintaining such an ornate and antiquated building is an expensive proposition, says Reverend Nancy Taylor.
It's an amazing building. It's glorious. It's also a complicated fine arts building, including slate roofs, carved wood, stained glass. If we get a little ding, it's always a major event, and just keeping this place up is a lot of work for this congregation.
With so many pressing needs, the congregation reached a difficult decision last year, deciding to sell some of their so-called heritage assets, 19 pieces of colonial silver and one of 2 original copies of the Bay Psalm book it owns. While some church members objected, Reverend Taylor said it was about the future.
We're not called to be conservators. We're not a library. We're not a museum. We are a church in mission and in motion.
Sotheby's, which handled yesterday's sale, says the $14.2 million price is justified.
The Bay Psalm book is one of the iconic books of all time. It's the first book printed in America. It's the first book written in America. It's quite remarkable. And it's also an extraordinary rarity. There are only 11 copies that survive.
And now, as Reverend Taylor puts it, Old South Church has 14 million more reasons to give thanks this holiday season. My first guest attended last night's auction in New York City. Debbie Kinsner is a trustee at the Old South Church. Her day job is Chief Investment Officer at Wellesley College. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I know how quickly these things go, and this was so important that this was the only object up for auction last night. How did it go?
It went fast. So from the time that the auction started, and the auctioneer, David Redden, who we just saw, gave his little boilerplate about you'll have to pay sales tax if you win the auction. It was to then until the ultimate sale was under 4 minutes. And I was watching from a skybox overlooking the floor, and I couldn't see any indication of when somebody bid that, David would take the price up, and I'd go, wait, I didn't see anybody move.
Was the bidder even there? Because so much of this is done online at this point.
So, no, the winning bidder was on the phone from Australia, David Rubenstein from the Carlyle Group. And so there's a person on a phone indicating his higher bid.
Well, this must be, I would imagine, sort of an outcome you wanted, because it was a difficult decision, as we've mentioned, to make the decision to sell the book. And this is the person who bought it has pledged to loan it out to museums and to libraries, and then, as I understand it, put it on long-term loan to some cultural institution. Is that what you had hoped for? So
for us, this is a great outcome for the book. One of the things that we learned so much in this process, and as the book toured the country, people drove hundreds of miles to see the book because it is so rare and such an important part of American history. And to think that it's going to have that greater access that it had to sort of extend the roadshow to more people is a wonderful thing. We've always thought access was important, so there's been a scanned copy of it on our website for years, but to see it in the flesh is an amazing thing.
What will you do with $14.2 million? I understand you already have a healthy endowment, but as we mentioned in the piece as well, there are major issues for taking care of that very historic but very old church.
Well, it's an old church, but it's a very vibrant church. The congregation is growing. We have a lot of important mission here in the city of Boston that this will help us to fund. Part of that is maintaining that historic building, but a big part of it is outreach to the community in a whole variety of ways.
And have you decided how exactly you'll do that outreach? Because you knew that this was valued at anywhere from about $10 to $20 million. Are you disappointed, by the way, that it didn't get $20 million?
A year ago, we had no idea what it was worth. It's impossible to know in advance what something like this is going to sell for. The last one sold in 1947 for $150,000. It could have gone for $5 million. It could have gone for much more. We had no clue. So No, we've really been crossing each bridge as we come to it instead of trying to think too far ahead. So we don't have solid plans for exactly how quickly we spend it or how we spend it or how we invest it in the endowment.
Now, we have an excerpt from the book here, and the phrasing is very unusual. I think we're looking at Psalm 23 here.
Yep.
Tell me what we're looking at, what the bulk of this book was.
So the Puritans, they didn't call them Puritans for nothing. They thought that the Church of England translation was too fancy and kind of tarted up. So they did their own direct translation from Hebrew, and they also really weren't didn't put a whole lot of stock in poetry or phrasing, so they kind of just
definitely not poetic.
Rolled it right out, and so it is awkwardly phrased.
But you would sing from it, and you have sung from it, and they would sing from it, correct?
Yes, and I think it's, for me it was a misconception that the Puritans disapproved of music. For them, of course they spent hours and hours in church, and singing was a big part of it. They sang without musical accompaniment and with no harmony. So we have sung the 23rd Psalm in church. You sing it to the tune of the doxology, and we have an amazing music director, so we don't sound too bad singing it. But apparently, the Puritans, they would have all known these and really just belted them out.
Now, how did the book come into the church's possession, or has it always been in some iteration of the church?
So we own 2 copies, and the copy that we retain is part of a collection left by one of the senior pastors of the church. But this one was part of the possessions of the church and had kind of been included with that collection and stored at the Boston Public Library for a lot of years.
Now, we have mentioned as well that there's a silver collection that you've been also looking to sell. What's the status of that? I think we're seeing some of the pieces right here. And I understand it was a sort of a different arrangement where you had more freedom to sell the book. Is that the case with the silver?
So the silver is more complicated because it's 19 objects, not just a single object. And there are different gift restrictions on, so we would never sell something where the donor said, give this to the church for use in communion forever. But in colonial times, banks were not really solid institutions, and so a wealthy member might give a piece of silver with the expectation that the church would use the silver would be a store of value until the church needed the money to sell it. So a lot of these objects could possibly be sold. We haven't really thought about it in enormous detail yet because selling the book was really a complicated thing for us, and of course we're not experts in selling valuable objects, so we've taken it one step at a time.
And I also just want to ask about, there was some rancor involved over the decision-making. There was a resignation from the church historian. How has that impacted the church?
Well, it was unfortunate. Of course, it was an emotional thing for all of us, and some people felt like we should never have done it. The congregational way is really to bring an issue to the whole congregation, talk about it, think about it, let the Spirit move people, and in the end, over 90% of the congregation approved the sale. So really, we're excited about the prospect and our future and what this will enable us to do in terms of our mission.
And as you mentioned, you still have another one, not to mention several others in the area, which is really nice. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.